We're back with workshop 2, video lecture part 2. And so I'm just going to pick up where I left off with the last one. And we were talking about searching for cases and good ways to do that and some tips that you could remember from earlier on in the semester. So on slide 5 of the PowerPoints for this topic, you'll actually find some tips for how to search for using keywords, both out of the facts and out of the issues. And sometimes you need to find synonyms for words that you might have thought to use that are not throwing up any search results. So I would just refer you to slide 5 for some further information about that and some further guidance. And also I just want to remind you, if you are looking at a primary source, so either case law or legislation that you have first found in a secondary source, be sure to follow your search through and find the primary source to quote from. It is a good rule of thumb, not just in McGill, but across academic and literary writing, that you should always quote from the primary source if it's available. And in most cases, your primary source will be available. So make sure you're not quoting from secondary sources when you can go and find the primary source itself, all right? So let's assume now that you have found the law that you want to rely upon in your memo. You now need to state the law. So if you actually turned to page 269 of your textbook, or page 259 of the 4th edition, not the revised edition, the 4th edition. So that's page 269 in our current textbook. You'll actually see an example of a legal memo and how the law is stated. So it's nothing big and fancy. It basically just tells you, like, for example, if it's a section of the criminal code, and then it states that section of the criminal code that applies thereafter. That's all. You don't need to fancy it up with your own words. You just need to state the applicable section. Something similar with case law. You would either state the ratio of the case, that's the principle of law that comes out of that case, or you could use a quote from the case that's specifically ideal for your client's fact situation and how you want to apply it, or just a general summary in your own words. So just be careful about that. Make sure you are following that appendix 14.1 guideline. That's on page 269 of your text, and refer there if you want to see what stating the law looks like. But it's not that crazy. I don't think it's anything that you guys will find too difficult. That doesn't come up specifically in our workshop today, but that's something you will need to do for your final memo. Okay, so just pay attention to that example. That slide that talks about that is also on slide 6 of the PowerPoint, and it says, as I reminded you, or I should say, I did not remind you, I told you in workshop 1, and I'm reminding you now, for lengthy quotes or anytime you quote legislation, so by lengthy, that's pretty much anything more than 2 lines, it should be single-spaced and indented. It should be a block quote, okay? And in fact, when you do that, you don't put quotations around the top and the top and the bottom, or the start and the end of the paragraph indented quote. It's just all single-spaced, no paragraph, but certainly footnoted at the end, okay? Please refer to McGill for further guidelines about that, or send me a quick email with an example, or if you have that already, in the Microsoft Word document that you're working off of, in which you are going to submit your analysis piece in for workshop 2. If you could just leave a little note that says, can you have a look at my law section? I've indented this quote and I just want to make sure I've done it correctly. Then I can give you feedback on that there as well. Okay? All right. And then we move on to applying the law. Once you've stated the law, we're going to apply it. And this is your analysis piece. So it could be called analysis or application or discussion. It could be called any of those. I think I set up the brief legal memo assignment for you, saying that we like to use the acronym FELAC with a C, not a D on the end for this. So if we're using the FELAC acronym, that A would stand for analysis or application. But sometimes you see it called discussion as well, and either of those terms are totally fine and appropriate. Okay, I'm less concerned with the term, as long as it's one of those or some variation thereof, and I'm more concerned with what's actually in that piece of your analysis. So, for an example of analysis section, I would refer you to page 270 of your textbook to look at what a discussion and analysis in a brief memo would look like. Excuse me, guys. I have a bit of a virus again. As far as I know, it's not coronavirus, so you don't need to worry. It's just a bit of a chest cold. So you'll have to excuse my my froggy throat here a little bit as we talk. So at page 270 of your current textbook, those of you using the older edition, it's page 260. It shows you what that analysis looks like. And you'll notice as soon as you look, it's not that long. It's like a paragraph. So I don't want you to beat yourself up with thinking you need to have a lot written here. You do need to be succinct. You need to be making sure you're covering and answering your issue statement accurately and addressing it properly. So if you have two, issue statements, you might need to have 2 paragraphs for analysis. If you have 1 issue statement, probably 1 paragraph is sufficient, okay? This is where you're basically saying, okay, well, the case law above says this, or the legislation above says this. My client situation is this, A and B and C, and therefore I think the facts would apply, or the case law would apply to my client situation in this way, and it would mean this for my client. Or I think the legislation would apply to my fact scenario or to my client situation this way, and I think it would mean this for my client. Okay? So it just needs to be a nice, short, succinct paragraph about how you're actually applying the law to your client situation. It is a tricky step. I actually think drafting the legal issue is probably a little bit more tricky than the analysis piece, but those 2 pieces together are the trickiest pieces, or the more difficult pieces that you would have to complete in a brief legal memo. All right? Okay, I'm just looking through, and then after that, the PowerPoint just talks about what are the next steps for your memo. So things you need to keep in mind going forward. Your memo will need a conclusion statement at the end of your analysis. So that's something you'd be looking at after you get my workshop 2, your analysis feedback. Prior to coming next week for workshop 3, you're going to want to have thought about already what your memo is going to look like as a whole. So formatting the entire thing, popping the conclusion statement in there, and starting to look a little bit ahead at what your footnotes may look like, where you may need a footnote. Workshop 3 will prepare you better for your footnotes as well as your bibliography at the end. So workshop 3 is focused entirely on citations. So going ahead, I would just have you look at the final tips, which are at slide 10 of the PowerPoint, if you're moving ahead with your work, with your memo. And then it's at slide 11 that says today's task, which is workshop 2 analysis. Draft the analysis of 1 issue. One of you, one partner, has to submit it in the workshop 2 Dropbox. That deadline still remains as it always was, so at the very end of your class time this week, okay? So there's a few minutes grace period with the Dropbox, but not that long, so make sure you're getting it in at the end of your required class time. I don't mind if you're working on this outside of class time, prior to class, but you do need to make sure that at least your workshop 2 analysis piece is in the workshop, in the Dropbox for workshop 2 at the very end of your typical class time, whatever that might be, okay? Only one partner needs to submit. That partner who submits, just like in workshop 1, they'll be the one that sees my feedback in a little feedback box. So please make sure you're sharing that with your other partner or partners in the group going forward. All right? There was a second requirement for the workshops going forward, workshop 2 and 3, and that was a brief docket. And that's really just to allow me to see what each partner is doing, because obviously the plan for these workshops was to be an in-class workshop where I could see what both of you were doing, and both of you had to be there and working toward the goal to receive the workshop grade. And we obviously don't have that ability right now without our face-to-face classes. So by providing a docket to me along with the analysis itself, I'll be able to see, okay, partner A, partner B, and possibly in some cases partner C did this, 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 this. They've all contributed toward this work for today, so everyone can share the grade that comes out of workshop 2, which again is 5%, up to 5%. So if I do get a docket, but one group member's name is not on it, that tells me that that group member was not involved in the process for workshop 2, and they will not share the grade with their group. So just be mindful of that, groups going forward. And so make sure you're pulling your weight and make sure you're doing what you need to. It's not fair to leave this up to one member of the group, okay? If that is done though, it's that member who's going to get the grades, and the members who are not contributing do not get the grades going forward, okay? All right, guys, I think we can pretty much tie it up. If you have any questions, I'll be available for class discussion in the first hour of our scheduled classes for this week via Bongo. That's the DC Connect virtual classroom tool. So you can find me there, and I have office hours throughout the week as well. That schedule is posted on DC Connect, so you can access that. In addition to all of that, you can send me an email as always. Okay, so take care, have a great week, and we'll talk again soon. Bye!